Hi guys, it's Kamil here, and it's time for a second review in my International Booker Prize project, where I plan on reviewing all 2020 long-listed books. Today we are going to talk about The Adventures of China Ion by Gabriela Cabezon Cámara, translated by Fiona Mackintosh and Iona Macintyre. I really like how this book is published, very smooth and clean, and this New York Times blurb saying revolutionizes all genres sets the expectation quite high, and there's no running away from it. It's right there on the cover, and you see it even before you open the first page. When I was picking it up, I knew only that this is a spin-off of Argentinian foundational epic poem El Gaucho Martin Fierro, and I knew that there's a lesbian relationship being depicted here of those two women, China and Liz, traveling through Argentina in 19th century. It's almost impossible to talk about this novel without addressing, in the first place, its famous predecessor. You know, the one that Gabriela Cabezon Cámara used as an inspiration for this novel, as it starts already from the title. Fierro means iron in Spanish. So now let's briefly talk about El Gaucho Martin Fierro. Gauchos are as much of a national symbol in Argentina as cowboys are in the USA. And just like cowboys, gauchos were skilled horsemen, unruly, quite often outlawed, inhabitants of Argentinian Great Plains. And they played quite a vital role in the Argentinian Independence War. However, being mostly of mixed origins, Indian and European, they were the poor of the country, who often were treated in a dehumanizing manner when put to forced labor. The epic poem El Gaucho Martin Fierro by Joseph Hernandez was published in 1872, and it established gauchos as a symbol of national identity, symbol of the fight against corruption and pro-European sympathies. This is sort of a protest poem, the one which, aside of artistic values, aimed at steering attention of other segments of Argentinian society to the abuse suffered by gauchos. Martin Fierro, the protagonist of the epic poem, is a gaucho and a talented singer living a simple life, who because of an intrigue of the local judge is put to forced labor at the local fort. He escapes during an Indian raid, but soon he is caught, prisoned, and he escapes again, and now he is persecuted by law as a fugitive. During one of his fights, he offends a black woman and kills her companion. Remember that part for a moment, okay? Then during one of the next fights, he befriends a policeman named Cruz and they end up living with Indians. That's the plot of the first book of Martin Fierro, and let's leave it here, as those are the most important elements Gabriela Cabezon Cámara would have a dialogue with here in her novel. But like you for sure already figured out, she will reshape it and more. So I didn't know any of that when I started reading this novel, but the moment the name Martin Fierro was being mentioned more and more often in the novel, I stopped reading and did a bit of a research. And you are welcome. I'm glad I did that research, as when back to reading I started noticing how brilliantly Cámara plays with the main events of the national epic here in the book, creating sort of Argentinian version of a Brokeback Mountain, not that dramatic though. Now on to the plot. The narrator of the novel is China Josefina Ion, a wife of Martin Fierro, won in a card game from a black man called here in this novel El Negro, the same one Martin Fierro kills in the epic poem from 1872. Do you remember the part I asked you to keep in mind, where in the epic poem Fierro offends a black woman and kills her companion? And yes, you heard it right. China was won in a card game and then quickly married off to Fierro. But here in this novel, when her husband is away, conscripted to the Argentinian army, China leaves her two children in the house of looking friendly enough neighbors, and using the opportunity, she runs away in the widely stretched arms of freedom. The freedom she never had up until that day. Soon enough, she meets an educated Scottish woman, Liz, who is on the way to find her husband, also conscripted to the army. And this is how the journey of those two women and their romance begins. Gabriela Cabezon Camara, in her book, gives a voice to a voiceless woman barely mentioned in the national epic. Obviously, feminism, even though it wasn't a topic of vivid dinner discussions in the 19th century, is a very present theme in this novel. Camara describes the traditional role of a woman of that time as a prison of sorts, a debilitating prison. Here in the fragment I'm going to read, China's adventures already started. And this is how Cabezon Camara contrasts both periods of China's life, prior and after the escape. Entwined in our burgeoning love, we laughed at old fears of being abandoned, of being defeated, of falling to the ground without the strength to get up, stuck to the ground and left at the mercy of the Caranchos, of being reduced to what we are, a structure of bones and minerals, like stones. Then in another fragment, up until that point, my life had been absent somehow. My life hadn't been my own. Maybe that's why I was always so far away. Maybe not. I don't know. Giving the voice to the voiceless woman is the first step in Cabezon Camara's process of reclaiming the national myth, creating this way space for women and queer people. The second step is the process of renaming, in which China receives her name. The narrator of a novel, the wife of Martin FIERRO, starts with the name China, which is a word used for a woman of lower class or a help. It carries the meaning of both the class and the status. China receives a proper name, Josephina, given her by Liz, and with that name she receives the identity. She creates her identity. Here in this fragment, now I am called China, Josephine Star, Ion Tararira. From the old days I've only kept Ion, the English for Fiero, which was never my name to begin with, and Star, which I choose when I choose Estrella. My real name? Well, I didn't have one. I was born an orphan, if that's possible. As if the violet-flowered pastures that softened the savagery of the Pampa had somehow given birth to me. That's what I used to think whenever I heard the woman who brought me up saying, "It's as if you just sprouted with the weeds." The change of the name here, like in many other novels, is the symbol of the new beginning. China, from the moment she meets Liz, starts her education. Both the traditional one, but also the one focusing on self-discovery, including sexual awakening. The first shift Gabriela Cabezon Camara offers us is the one of taking male-centered national myth and reclaiming it to show the female perspective, but not a female perspective in her traditional gender role, but the one where gender roles are compromised. Those two women traveling through Argentina are not only self-sufficient, able to fend for themselves, but also, and here is when another shift happens, and this is the shift of queering the Argentina foundational myth. So China, with the help of Liz, starts cross-dressing as a man, initially for security reasons, but this is only the beginning of turning the foundational epic into what we might call the queer origins of Argentina. I mean, that's possible in the parallel universe, right? Gender fluidity is a theme explored widely in this novel, and China is just one of many gender fluid characters here on the pages of this book. This is not the only blasphemous road Gabriela Cabezon Camara ventured on. The Adventures of China Iran is not only focused on demystifying a national epic hero Martin FIERRO, showing him as hot-blooded drunk, but Cabezon Camara goes farther, making FIERRO one of the protagonists of her subversive queer narration. Queering and feminizing national myths is not the only theme of this novel, as Camara, following original epic, explores the dark side of national building too, but definitely is more descriptive in showing the exploitation of gauchos by big haciendas, here called estancias. The scenes in this novel depicting Capo Malo, the dark side of the fort, where the second part of the novel takes place, are so cruel, dehumanizing and dark that you could easily mistake them for the slavery narration. Then a relatively newly established Argentinian army is described by adjectives such as savage. The politics against Indians are shown as clearly devilish propaganda, creating a common enemy around which the new nation is supposed to consolidate. This novel is destructing the foundational myths as much as Scorsese's Gangs of New York did, or McCarthy's The Blood Meridian did. I'm aware that you listening to it most probably are concluding right now that it's quite heavy, but it's absolutely not. It's not overwhelming, mostly due to the fantastic humor Cabezon Cámara and brilliant pair of translators, Fiona Mackintosh and Iona Macintyre, served us. Additionally, the plotting and the language add to its lightness, and the fantastic ending, demonstrating an alternative way of building the society, is like a cherry on top. I know that some will find the ending a bit wacky, but I loved it, especially the freedom of it and the environmental element in which animals are shown as sentient beings, treated as members of the local community. Now on to mentioned already by me language. The language. Because of the language, the author and the translators had my attention already at the very beginning, when I read the first paragraph. It was the brightness of the light. The young pup, radiating life, was scampering excitedly between the dusty surpose of the few dogs left around here. The brilliancy of the writing and then the translation is shown especially in the descriptions of fauna and flora, when those are often used in metaphors depicting characters' emotions. Like here in this fragment, I ask myself if God had heard my crying, the way I used to cry in the days when I still cried, crying my eyes out completely, silently. My tears were like the swollen rivers back there, pure silent water. And now, going back to the New York Times blurb on the cover, revolutionizes all genres. A bit about that. The novel is close to a kaleidoscope in terms of genres. The first part of the novel reads almost like a travel journal, and then especially when we read about the Pampas are the term used for fertile South American lowlands. So when we read about it, it feels almost like one of those nature books of Darwin or Humboldt from the 19th century. And then we have an epic poem built to imitate 19th century original. There was only one element in this novel that put me off, related to two kids of China, and not so much even to the fact that she leaves them at the mercy of her neighbors, but it had to do with her reaction in regards to them when she finds out that her husband's art was stolen. Then she suddenly thinks, my children were robbed. It felt a bit out of character. She didn't even think about the children during the whole trip. And suddenly, when the heritage is being discussed, she thinks about them. And I was thinking, where did they come from? Then brace yourself for very descriptive lesbian scenes, as descriptive as taken out from Abdelatif Keshish movie, Blue is the Warmest Color, if you have seen that. Nonetheless, this is just another very strong position on the list, and I'm quite afraid I might have jinxed the award for myself, starting from two such great novels as, after two like those, statistically, it can be only a downhill from here until it picks up once again. Hopefully not. Let me know what you think if you had a chance to read this one already. The schedule of my reading is down in the description box below, and you can find it on my Instagram profile. And I'll talk to you soon, actually on Sunday, about The Discomfort of Evening by Marieke Lucas-Rijnveld. Have a brilliant week and stay safe, stay healthy, stay home. Bye bye guys.